And joining us now here on the program, pleased to have with us Chuck Spencer. He's the Executive Director of Corporate and Government Relations at GROWMARK. Chuck, it is always great to catch up with you, sir. I hope you're doing well.
Jesse, doing great. This is a time of year where we're replenishing our water table. I guess that's why I like to look at rainy days. So, yeah, getting in prep for spring and looking forward to that planting season coming right up.
Definitely rainy days. Some folks maybe still some snowy days in there, but like you said, it's replenishing that water table, and that's what is important. Well, Chuck, I want to dive into some farm policy issues with you and talk about some of the things you're seeing right now. Obviously, we're hearing a lot of talk about this farm bill. We're seeing all the hearings. Stakeholders are voicing their opinions, their concerns as to what we want to see in this farm bill. And I've heard a lot of talk that this could be the first ever $1 trillion farm bill. I'd love just your thoughts in general. What are some of the things you're seeing with the farm bill, farm policy related, that you are keeping an eye on there at GROWMARK?
Absolutely. We're watching the pace of progress and the discussion. Too many people are talking about, well, we'll need to extend it into the next year. Don't take your eye off the ball. Look what's happening in the tournament at the NCAAs.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta be focused on winning the game before you move on to the next round. And that's exactly what you have to be ready for. Is there's a lot of progress being made by committees as far as drafting, writing, and moving the ball around the court in the Farm Bill arena. And that's where you want to be. You want to be getting your language in first. You want to be getting your ideas in. Now's the time to be talking to members of Congress. And they're holding hearings very regularly. Now, whether that clock runs out on them and they have to extend or not, I wouldn't worry about it, because I'd play today as though they'll pass one this year and then get my priorities invested. You'd mentioned $1 trillion. The Congressional Budget Office, which does the budgeting for our federal government, has stated that they expect it to be approximately $1.5 trillion over 10 years. And 82% of that is a Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP funds, we can call it from here on. And that's where a lot of food assistance moves out to people. There's going to be some discussions on whether there should be more work rules implemented with that. It's been very clear, Jesse, from the Democrats, no changes to the SNAP program. And so I think that we could see Farm Bill progress most certainly this year if people are really thoughtful about how they move any type of discussion on changing SNAP rules, and stay very focused on the provisions of the crop of the commodities title,
Mm-hmm.
conservation, research. And I think that's where a lot of ag groups are spending their time, is in those zones.
Well, and you mentioned those zones there right at the end. I think that's a couple big areas there. One, obviously protecting that farm safety net. That's been a big topic of conversation for our main staple commodities. But then to the conservation side, you mentioned that. And I think that ties into a lot of the discussions around sustainability, the carbon markets, and so much more. What's your thoughts with conservation? Are we going to see more emphasis on conservation portions in this farm bill, do you think, Chuck?
Yes, we will. And that's been a discussion. And I say we will because there is a tremendous amount of focus on conservation, carbon sequestration programs. And then the questions I've been receiving is, do you think that we will have some requirements if we sign up for crop insurance? Will we be required to do additional practices? Will we be required to do cover crops or some type of other conservation practice if we sign up for the Farm Bill from the standpoint of assistance programs if we have a poor price or poor weather event? And I think what we have seen very clearly, that the Inflation Reduction Act that's already been passed had $20 billion in additional conservation funding. And I really believe that's where the majority of discussion over climate change provisions and what agriculture could do took place. That funding could be brought forward into this farm bill. I think, though, that what we're going to see, and we've heard it as recent as yesterday with colleagues who are in Washington, D.C., talking with the USDA and Robert Bonney, very clearly demonstrating that their interest is in voluntary, educational-based conservation programs, and the carbon markets should be continuing to develop in a free market-based system. And I know that when we think of being a farmer-owned cooperative system, farmers want the market to develop so they would receive the benefit. And that's where it should go. They're taking the risk, they're implementing practices. Benefits should go to the farmer in carbon sequestration programs, particularly carbon markets or carbon credits that are sold, and then make sure that they're stackable on top of USDA type of programs. So if we participated in a conservation program, that we could sell the carbon credits, but we could also take part in the conservation assistance programs. And that's what's important, because it's very expensive to change practices whenever you've got a production system in place.
Well, Chuck, I know the last couple of days you spent some time in Canada as well, and hearing about how they handle carbon and carbon taxes up there and more. Do you see possibly the U.S. drawing some parallels or some similarities from what Canada is doing as we look at these at this growing carbon market?
It is a tremendous educational opportunity for all involved. When we get farmers of Canada interacting with farmers down here in the States, our production systems and really concerns are equivalent. But what we do have is in Canada, they went ahead and put a carbon tax on fossil fuel use. And then something as simple as drying grain on the farm. I think they were, well, I know that they were saying approximately 60% of the grain or more goes through commercial entities. Some of them can be farmer-owned co-ops. Some of them can be the private sector grain dryers. What's fascinating is they've got an exemption moving through their parliament that would only exempt dryer gas for farmer on-farm storage facilities. So it's really going to hit the smallest portion of grain that would be dried. And the point I bring out in that is that when you look at their policies and what they do and how carbon taxes could impact so many segments of an economy, I think the United States ought to be very thoughtful about how we deal with sustainability. Keep it in the private sector. Keep innovation flowing freely. As soon as we tend to put a program in place that would be government ran, we seem to stifle innovation. And so I think the free market is moving things forward pretty soundly down here. I think up there it continues to work and thrive. But what it does have is additional costs embedded in the system. And so then, as we know, on a global platform, and we have watched this, Jesse, with the most recent challenges with Ukraine and the war that Russia is choosing to implement, that trade flows are changing. And then that means that there is economic disruption because it's not always the most efficient routing of goods across the globe. So we need to think through that. And those are acts by governments. And then the free market was probably the best. And we would continue to be an advocate for how that's best sorted out.
Well, Chuck, great thoughts. Just a couple minutes here before we wrap up. Anything else on your mind? Anything else that you want farmers and ranchers to think about here as we're watching farm policy and more here in the next couple of months ahead?
I do. I think we have a great story to tell, and we have to be on a continual improvement basis. I have heard in dialogues with farmers that they get tired of talking about what they do on the farm, or I wish that some of the promotional programs that we fund didn't spend so much in this arena. I will advise us all that an old adage in the advertising industry is, when you are tired of saying your message that you want to communicate, someone else is just listening for the first time. And that's something that we have to remember, is that from an agricultural perspective, we have to be constantly messaging to the non-farm communities. Agriculturalists are concerned about the environment. We take actions regularly to preserve soil, to increase soil health, to implement conservation practices, improve water quality, and care for wildlife on our farms. I can't think of people that do that any differently. And that we have to be very focused on sustainability of economics at the field level to be sustainable in the bigger picture of environmental sustainability. Because economics drives the ability to be sustainable in the environmental component by new equipment purchases, changing practices, and the very many aspects of programs that we implement on the farm. So I think those are very constructive, positive messages that we can work not only with elected leaders, but our colleagues that would be interested in what's going on the farm today.
Well, a lot of great thoughts and insight. We appreciate the time. With that, Chuck Spencer, Executive Director of Corporate and Government Relations at GROWMARK. Thanks for joining us, sir. We'll talk to you again real soon.
You betcha, Jesse. I look forward to the next time.